Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Marley Wagner. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Services at ESG, and I will be moderating today's webinar titled 2021 Customer Success Leadership Study Results Revealed. Before we get started, a couple of quick notes. First, I apologize that you can't see the presenters on camera today. We are experiencing a bit of a glitch with the video on our webinar platform, so unfortunately, it looks like you'll only be able to see the slides, but we're still really excited to share this information with you. I'd like to also remind you that we are recording this session, and a link to the recording will be available 24 hours after the webinar. Throughout the presentation, you are more than welcome to submit your questions via the question tab, and we'll do our best to answer them as we go and address as many questions as we possibly can at the end of the webinar as well. So that being said, I'm very pleased to introduce you to today's speakers. First, we have Abby Hammer, who is the Chief Customer Officer at ChurnZero. ChurnZero is a customer success software platform. Abby, thank you so much to you and the entire ChurnZero team for hosting us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, Marley. We really appreciate it.
Of course. And next we have Jay Nathan, who is the Chief Customer Officer at HireLogic. HireLogic is a customer engagement and community platform. Jay is also the founder of the Gain, Grow, Retain customer success community. Great to have you with us, Jay.
Thank you. It's good to be here with you and Abby today.
So I'm really excited to chat with Jay and Abby to go over the results from our recent CS leadership survey. ChurnZero, ESG, and HireLogic all conducted this survey together. So we're really looking forward to sharing the results with all of you in the audience. So first, before we dig into the questions, just wanted to give a really quick high-level overview of the people who responded to this survey. So as you can see, we broke down survey respondents both by company revenue and by number of employees. Most common category as far as revenue fell in that $10 to $50 million category. And then as far as number of employees, most common response was between 51 and 200 employees. We also broke it down by job title of our respondents. As you can see, we had a range of job titles respond to the survey, with the most common job title being either director or senior director level. Really interesting call out here. Last year when we conducted this survey, the most common job title was manager or senior manager. So really promising and exciting to see, folks are moving up in their career in CS. So with that being said, let's get into the nitty-gritty, into the details. The first category we looked at in the study was around the influence of customer success within the broader organization. So Jay and Abby, the first thing I want to ask you about was one of the areas that the study explored, and that was whether or not customer success reports directly to the CEO and the role of the Chief Customer Officer, the CCO, that role that both of you hold in your organizations. So we saw that 13% of survey respondents do have a CCO, and 54% of respondents have their customer success organization reporting directly to the CEO. Abby, I'll go to you first. Why do you think that CCO role is so important? And any advice for CS leaders who don't currently hold that title on how to start working towards it?
Absolutely. Presence in the C-suite indicates importance across the organization. It's as simple as that. So if you have a chief customer officer, that's a very strong signal to your own team, to your customers, to the world that you value the customer experience. You have someone at the highest levels of decision making who's responsible for that. In terms of how people can get there if they don't have it, as a nuanced thing, and Jay, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, but when people ask me this, I usually ask by asking them some questions back, like what's in your sphere of responsibility? Are you a revenue center or a cost center, both in perception or in reality? I also often ask who they currently report up to now if it's not directly to the CEO and they're not on the C-suite, because I think depending on whether you roll up underneath a sales organization or whether you roll up underneath some sort of support organization or something entirely different, the pathway to carving out your own space in the org and having a defined role is going to be a little bit different. biggest generic piece of advice I guess I give to people is that if you don't own revenue, if you are not clearly a revenue center within your organization, then the path to the C-suite is going to be steeper. It's going to be harder. It's always a hill, but it's going to be harder. Because the fact of the matter is that when you own revenue, when what you do is tied directly to the business's overall goal and bottom line, you're just in a more powerful position within the org. When you think about a growing org, at some point, the amount of revenue owned by CS eclipses pretty radically eventually, the new dollars brought in by new sales. And when you think about whoever owns those renewing dollars, that should be a very powerful role in the org. So if you don't actually have your hands around that number and are responsible for that number, it puts you in a much different sort of seat on decision making. I have some thoughts on how we can work towards that, but I want to pause and see what Jay thinks about, sort of the role of CCO before we talk about that.
Yeah, completely agree on the revenue ownership accountability piece of it. It's just sort of a game changer. And what, the important thing for CS leaders to understand is that even if maybe you don't handle the renewal transactions, right, themselves, maybe you have a renewal team, maybe your sales team handles that, but you're in a better position than almost anybody else in the company to help predict what that number is going to look like. And what's really important to a CFO, a CEO, and a board, yes, sales is important, and that is a critical part of all of our businesses. But the other piece that's really important is the ability to predict what our revenue is going to be. So if you can accurately tell your executive team and your board that you're going to be at 92% gross retention this quarter versus 90 or 89 or 94 or 95, then the business can plan based on that. And that's just such an important concept. So completely doubling down on what you're saying, Abby, completely agree that, at this point in our evolution in customer success, correlation to revenue is key. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of how you think about getting into the CCO role, I think there are three things that are really important here. One, yes, you have to be able to impact customer retention. You have to know why customers are staying, why they're leaving. You sort of have to become a market expert in a lot of ways to help the business understand how things are working, where are the key issues with the product. What are the key hurdles that a customer has to get over just inside of their own organization before they can successfully adopt your solution? So if you can become an expert on those things, why customers fail and why they succeed, so that you can be that conduit of information to the rest of the business, that's key number one. Key number two is supporting go-to-market. And this ties in with what Abby just mentioned and what we just talked about with revenue. Being able to provide advocates, being able to provide references, customers that can provide case studies for the sales team to use, being able to sort of cultivate that ecosystem of positive users is a really key role for a customer success team to play, and one that will become a very strong focus as you get into the CCO kind of territory. The third thing is just, I would say, operational leadership. Usually CCOs they're overseeing multiple functions. So you've got support, you may have implementation. At Higher Logic, we have a separate strategic services team that's different from our implementation team, a customer success team, an ops team. So I think, the more exposure you can get to other functions, maybe it's stepping out of CS for 6 months and going to learn a different function and learn how to manage in a different function, so that you have some cross-functional knowledge and expertise that you can apply. So Abby, I don't know if you resonate with any of those things or not, but
all of those, absolutely. In fact, I want to add a fourth. It's really an extension of the third there. I think CS leaders who stand the best chance of getting into the CCO position are masters at collaboration and partnership within the org. And that's really important for a bunch of different reasons. I think CS, and I'm sure you would agree, Jay, I think CS is most strong when it generally sits in the middle of the organization and is this very generous, proactive farm of insights about your customers, whether it's to marketing, whether it's to sales, whether it's to product, sort of you act as that central knowledge base on who your customers are and what they need, and put data behind that as well. But as CS grows, a lot of us are often, sort of trying to takeover sounds so aggressive, but maybe bring back things into the realm of CS that might be owned by other teams, out of necessity or just tradition. So I think, again, a CS leader who's really good at collaboration and understanding why we might have shared functions, or even some things might be better owned by CS in the long run, that takes some finesse, and that takes really understanding the business and the purpose of that, of whatever you want to take over. So you've got to be great at the partnership.
Yeah, and just to add one more piece of that, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about over the past year is just the role that leadership in general plays in customer success, and because it is such a central function within the business, it touches everything: product, support, implementation, engineering in some ways, certainly sales and marketing. And to your point, Abby, just working on core leadership skills. Can you run a good meeting? Can you, as you were just saying, can you have a collaborative discussion with your peers? Can you empathize with what they're trying to do and help them understand your world? It's so powerful. So great addition there.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Thanks, you guys. So the next topic I want to talk about that we covered in the study actually ties really nicely back into something you were both just talking about, which is around the relationship between customer success and revenue, and sort of on the flip side of revenue, around budgets. So something that we specifically surveyed on was around creating budget in customer success, the ability to create budget, and how COVID has impacted that ability. So we're really excited to see that a strong majority of CS leaders do have a seat at that executive table, whether or not they hold that CCO title, and the ability to create budget. 75% of respondents said they do have that ability. And thankfully, and somewhat surprisingly, it seems that COVID had a relatively minimal impact on that ability. 86% of our respondents said that COVID did not change their ability to create budget. So really relieved, I think, to see that. But I want to focus on those that are not yet in that majority of CS leaders who can create their own budget. And they really still need to get that seat at the table and that budget ownership. Jay, let's go to you first on this one. What advice would you give those people that still really need to get that seat at the table to create budget?
Yeah, I think of it probably a little bit less as a seat at the table, and a little bit more around how to create a business case for what you need. So, I think one of the things that is a challenge is to present a compelling case to your CEO, to your CFO, again, to your board, of what types of investments you need and what kind of return those investments are going to have. So are you using a segmentation model to be able to show customer segmentation customer retention at different levels of customer segments, and how you intend to move the needle on that? How confident are you in that? If you have a cohort of 250 customers and the retention rate is 85%, and you think you can get that up to 90%, what's the dollar impact of that? How can you go tell a story? So the first key to getting a quote unquote seat at the table is really to own the problem yourself, and make sure it makes sense to you as a leader, right? If it were your business and you wanted to maximize the dollars that you're spending for the maximum benefit to the business, would that calculation make sense to you? If it doesn't, then actually I wouldn't present it yet, right? I would go focus on something that will move the needle. So the way you earn a seat at the table is by coming with credible data, credible insights, and a plan. And I think that's the way to move your career forward in this industry, is really by doing that. What would you say, Abby?
I'd 100% agree. I mean, if I was to summarize what you just said there, Jay, is that you have to have operational excellence. You've got to be solid on what you need and why. And, something I'd love, when we hopefully do this study again in 2022, something I'd love us to dig in on is when I talk to CS leaders, and I'll bring up this same thing around budget. A lot of times, what I uncover is that people will say yes to this question, meaning that, they have budget, they get to approve it, but a lot of their A lot of CS hires are formulaic. They should be based off of, new dollars coming in and what you need to support and the goals you have. But that formula isn't necessarily under their control. And that's what I'd love us to dig into a little bit more. When we say create budget and have a seat at that decision-making table, it's not just to sort of pass on the formulas that have always been there. I know quite a few CS leaders are still fighting against some benchmark that their CEO loves about, whether it's number of people you can handle in implementation or a size of a book that a CSM can handle. But really having full thought through use cases, to your point, Jay, around what are the formulas that you think are correct? How do they line up to the goals that you're presenting? How do they vary between your segments of customers? And having it be a lot more specific than I think some of us have gotten the chance to go to thus far. So maybe in future years, I'd love us to dig into that. But outside of that, I agree with you that you need to be rooted in the numbers. You need to be confident in your use cases. You need to be thinking about where you are both maybe asking, when you ask for more, what are you giving in return? Make sure there's always a balance. If you just show up and you ask, then you're gonna struggle on the flip side, is what are you giving back on that? And the thing that's I know has been helpful for some people and helpful for me is before I go to my CEO, I'll practice the pitch on one of my fellow peers, to have an opportunity with someone else who also goes and talks about budget, whether it's my sales leader or my marketing leader. And we use that as an opportunity to really sort of stress test each other's thoughts and plans before we're really going in front of the powers that be to make our cases.
Yes, I love that. And I already wrote down the question for next year, Abby. So that's amazing. Great thought. Anything else either of you want to say about budget before we move on to the next topic?
I think the only thing I'd say on the COVID front is that this to me is a very positive sign. I hesitate to use the phrase silver lining on COVID, but I do think for us as customer success professionals, when we went through a period of new sales drying up right at the beginning of COVID and a fear about when it would come back, it really did circle the wagons around current customers. It turned the focus inwards. So I think this is a really lovely reflection of CS's growth and strength in the organization, that even through hopefully what is a once in a lifetime event for all of us, that it's been a consistent time for CS.
Yes, hopefully it is once in a lifetime.
All the fingers crossed. Yes.
All right, so that being said, as I mentioned, we didn't see a lot of change year over year when looking at those different factors related to budget. But where we did see some change was a bit further downstream, going back to the revenue topic we were talking about earlier, about generating revenue through the ownership of renewal and expansions, and at a higher level, just around organizational alignment in general. So in the survey results, we did see an increased ownership by customer success of both renewal from 50% in 2020 to 55% of respondents in 2021, as well as an upsell cross-sell. That one was slightly smaller. The bigger increase was around renewals. But I view this as a really positive trend. So Jay, tell me, what are your thoughts here?
Well, I think it's a really important thing that customer success teams are taking ownership of this, because again, it is grabbing onto something substantial. I've sort of said this before, and I don't know if people agree with me on this or not, but I think we avoid using the words account management in conjunction with customer success probably a little too much, because there are, he who owns the renewal really owns the account and is the account manager, he or she, I guess I should say, or they. So the customer success team stepping up and owning that, or being assigned that, is a really good sign that customer success is an organization or a part of the organization that is here to stay. We know its importance. I think if you look at the best account managers, even in the perpetual licensed software world, and certainly really good account managers in the SaaS world, they all don't just pay attention to bookings and renewals. They also pay attention to how successful the customer is being, because they know it all ties together. So I think this is cool. To me, you know, customer success, being the primary account owner, that's how it works at Higher Logic for us at least, is a really important thing, because somebody has to be engaging with that customer on a week by week, month by month basis. And that's typically going to be the person who's responsible for the renewal. So I really like the direction this trend is headed. I would also venture to say, by the way, there's a lot of use cases for sales and account management being in sales and owning the renewal. So that's not a knock on anybody who does it that way, because it's certainly, as you get into more complex, larger organizations, organizations with bigger customers, the sales team might hold on to those accounts indefinitely, which also makes sense. And therefore they would own the renewal. So customer success is going to play a slightly different role, more of a product expert. Certainly the more complex the product is, they might play a heavier product role. But they should still be aligned to, as part of that account team, thinking about how that customer is going to renew, how that customer is going to buy more services from us, how that customer is going to become an advocate in the marketplace for us. So still a heavy role for customer success to play in there as well.
Yeah, you know, Jay, I'm with you. So here at ChurnZero, customer success owns the renewal, so we are like Higher Logic in that capacity. You know, whether customer success owns the renewal or not, I feel almost is like a religious political topic. You know, in our space, people get really heated about it, including myself. I have strong opinions on it. But what I do want to underscore something you said, because I think it's important, is that there is no one size fits all. Like, there isn't actually a right answer here. And to me, it comes down to, if you're trying to make the decision about where this lives, I think we should come back to what's going to make sense for the customer. Where I push back on organizations where, if they don't have customer success own the renewal, is when I hear things like, oh, well, if customer success has to deal with money, it sullies the relationship, or it makes it too salesy, things like that. And I personally believe that if you have strong customer programs that are rooted in a clear customer journey and and getting value in a consistent, reliable fashion for your customers, then the renewal is just a natural extension of that relationship. You know, I've said before, it's crossing the T's and dotting the I's on continuing to work together. You know, where I push back is when people don't want customer success to own the renewal because they think they can't be good negotiators, or they can't handle the money component of it. I disagree with that. And I think it should be owned in whatever capacity, whether it's on one team or multiple, in a way that's going to be clearest for the customer. There's a lot of hot potatoing of customers between internal teams to match what we internally want or what we internally think is best. And sometimes we don't fully stop and think about what that does to the customer, how much it confuses the relationship, how much it fractures their trust with us, you know, because they don't have a consistent place to go or clear place to go for certain things. So I agree that there's not necessarily a one size fits all, but again, going back to what we were talking about, if CS in one way or another does not have a very clear line to that renewal revenue in particular, not a dash line, a clear line to that revenue, I think that's something you want to take a look at.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll tell you this is just one data point, but it's the way we do it at Higher Logic, and so I like it, of course. But we created a renewal team that it was initially a subset of our customer success team, and we sort of learned. We have a board member from UKG, or formerly Kronos Ultimate, that we sort of took our notes from how they organize. Are of course much bigger than we are. We're only about 400 employees total, but there is value. Renewals can be a really valuable thing for the business if you negotiate them right. One of the things that you want to do is you want to try to renew the customers for as many years as you possibly can. Don't settle for 1-year renewals. The more renewals you have, the more churn you're probably going to have in a given year. So if you can stretch those out, do multi-year renewals, that can be a big benefit to the business. So if those conversations are nuanced and they are more complex and there's more back and forth, there's a tie into systems and forecasting and all these other pieces too. So if you can consolidate that skill set and build it out as you scale, and get a handful of people that are really, really good at those conversations. And then to your point, Abby, set expectations with the customer so that they know they're going to be talking to somebody different during the renewal period. It's not going to replace their CSM, but they're going to be having that commercial discussion with them. Then I think it can still work. The way we do it is CSMs are accountable and the renewal manager is responsible. And then they have shared metrics that ensure that they're aligned on that renewal target that they have each quarter.
Absolutely. And I think you said it right, Jay, where it comes down to what's your complexity, what's involved, what are your goals as a business? Are you really focused on multi-year? Are you really focused on discount removal? Whatever it might be, that'll bring you to what is the most logical conclusion. And I think we should all be open to the fact that it can change as you grow as an organization as well.
Absolutely.
Just because you did it that way 2 years ago doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way you should be doing it now. So it is not a set and forget it thing. You should come back and relook at it.
Great point.
I want to go back to something you said, Abby, about the hot potatoing of customers. I love that metaphor because that is really what ends up happening, and I think it's true in renewals, and I think where it can be equally disruptive, if not more so, is when we're talking about upsells and cross sells, right? If you're CSM and the moment that your customer says, "Oh, I need more this or more that," and they say, "Oh, I can't talk to you. You have to go talk to sales." That can just lead to a really disjointed customer experience. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like renewal is a cleaner line. Expansion does get a little, the area gets more gray. I do think the base rule that we're saying of coming back to what makes sense for the customer and also what makes sense operationally is important. When people ask me, like, should we own expansion, I usually end up asking a lot of questions around, well, what type of expansion are you doing? Some expansion, to your point, Marley, feels very natural to stay with customer success. You have the exact same buyer, the same teams are going to be using. It's within, whatever you're selling. Maybe it's more seats, or maybe it's a related module or product, but it's all same within the same value proposition that you're working right now, the same value track you're pursuing. That kind of expansion, to me, that does feel, if you're like, well, just because you want to talk about money, I got to go bring in someone else, that does feel very broken up to me, as opposed to capitalizing when the moment is right, striking while the iron's hot, and letting success own that. On the other hand, there's certainly expansion that starts to feel more new businessy, totally new decision makers, maybe a different, set of benefits or value propositions. And what we don't want customer success doing is cold calling into new units, or sort of becoming responsible for sort of this more classic new sales approach, because that does divide their attention away from customers, people who are there in the natural growth they're trying to do with them. So a lot of times, and this is something that's reflected here at ChurnZero, it's hard to do. So I'll start by saying that it's hard to do, but I actually think where there's not a clear stays with CS, goes to sales, you can also really consider joint operations between those two teams. I talked about, a good CS leader being spectacular at partnerships, and I think sales is one of those partnerships that you have to invest in. They can sometimes have CS and sales can have an adversarial relationship, and that needs to not be the case. Because the fact of the matter is that a lot of expansion could actually be best served for the customer and for the business, when you have both groups involved as appropriate. So Jay, I don't know what you think about any of those thoughts.
Yeah, the biggest problem I've seen in that is when the comp plans are not aligned, or when they sort of compete with one another inadvertently. At the end of the day, if you can get those things to sort of all point to the same outcomes, and people have different roles, and you're clear about what those roles are between the teams, then I think it's necessary. I'd also say that expansion, upsell, and cross-sell, as you scale, those are three different things. Cross-sell could be like a whole new sale to a whole new business unit, or a whole new buyer within the organization. Whereas a simple expansion could be, hey, you have 15 more users we want to light up in the system. That's just going to drive adoption and onboarding of those users. That is more of a customer success function. Drives revenue. If there's no contracting involved, then it makes it a lot easier for someone who might be on the CS side of things to just go drive that.
I agree.
I do like there to be some kind of separation there. I think it helps you run a cleaner sales process as well. And in the minute you get CSMs involved in something that looks like a sales process, then they're a sales team, and which is fine. But be clear about what that is, and just know that with that responsibility comes other responsibilities like forecasting, quotas, targets, all that kind of stuff. And then the question is, do you really want is that really the role that you want the CSM to be playing with the customers? You just got to be careful with that.
I agree, and I feel like if you feel like you're flirting with that line, one thing that I've seen work really well is that then CS becomes the source of the op. That you set expectations around them of serving up a certain number of ops or certain potential value of ops to sales to go chase, because again, CS does have the pulse on the customer. They are, in many, if not most scenarios, they are the ones that are going to see the buying signals, see the potential. So then if it is best owned by sales, it doesn't mean that CS can't be involved in that process and even, held to certain metrics that very closely tie to the revenue.
Yeah, like that CSQL, customer success qualified lead, similar to a marketing qualified lead for a net new customer. It's a good
Absolutely.
point. You guys started talking about this, but we have a related question from the audience, so I want to share that with you both. So this question is, if CS owns renewals, what are your thoughts about the CSM role having quotas or receiving commissions, etc.? Jay, you started talking about that, but I don't know if you have additional.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So again, I think the best way to do this, and maybe I think it's the best way because it's the way we do it right now, but is there's a target on a renewal rate, and CSMs, at least in my experience, what I've always done on the CSM team is I've created a variable comp bonus structure as opposed to a commission structure. When you think about a SaaS business, you don't typically think of paying commissions on renewal. You typically think of paying commissions on the initial sale. It's not out of the question to pay a commission on a renewal, but it can incentivize some short-term behavior by the people who are responsible for it. So that's the one thing I'd watch out for there. But a bonus plan saying, hey, look, need you to hit a 90% renewal rate this quarter, and if you do that, there's a sliding scale of a bonus payout, and every point you go above that, you maybe get more. There's some accelerators in there. That's a very simple generalization, but those have worked really, really well for me in the past. The other thing on comp is you just want to make sure that you have the right to sort of look at that and say, okay, this person's doing a great job on the numbers, but their focus is way too short term. You got to keep that stuff balanced, because as we know, as a CS leader, you need to be thinking about renewals, not just this quarter, but the following quarter and the next 2 or 3 quarters after that as well. So yeah, we could probably talk for an hour just on comp plans.
On comp plans, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. We have something similar, Jay. I align to your thinking on it. That those targets around your version of retention that you're focused on, whether that's NRR, whether that's GRR, whether that's logo, whatever it is, tends to be a clean way to get into it, and then still gives you opportunities that, depending on where you're focusing as a business, you can slice and dice things. Perhaps you have one component of their comp that's just on their renewals, and then a separate component that's on upselling, if that's an area that you want them to be focused on. You want the factors to be simple and clean, and you want to make sure that you're motivating the right behavior, to your point, Jay, and not motivating sort of short-term gains for potential long-term pain.
Yep.
All great points. Thank you both. Okay, so I want to move on and talk about customer success technology. We saw some really interesting data about operations in general, and specifically the tech stack in customer success in this year's survey. So we actually saw the number of survey respondents who have a purpose-built customer success platform, like a ChurnZero. We saw that decline slightly year over year, from 47% of respondents last year to 44% this year. So Abby, I'm curious, why do you think that is? And, what is this data telling us?
Yeah, I'll be honest and say that when I first saw those numbers, of course, always we want to see a bigger number, of course, but I actually genuinely think a lot of this is a bit of noise. The difference between 44 and 47 is not enormous. It might just, this is a large survey, but not, thousands and thousands and thousands of replies. So, we do have the possibility that we're just seeing a little bit of noise in the data here. When I think about whether that makes me concerned that it went slightly down, it doesn't, because I look at us, we're growing. I look at others in our space, they're growing, both from how the businesses are doing, the funding they're picking up, search terms on the platforms and on the jobs that are related to those platforms. All of the indicators of the health of the space are going in the right direction. If I had to throw out a bit of a theory on maybe why we saw a slight decline here, as you mentioned, Marley, the audience of this year, the main bucket was that 10 to 50 mil 50 mil revenue, and it is overall the respondents were just have more revenue out there than last year. So I think there is a potential that maybe some of what we're seeing in here, in my experience at larger companies, you can entertain a little bit more of the build versus buy conversation, just because you have resources, you have teams. It may seem like a good way to go at first. When I hear those discussions, I always come back to, you'd never ask a CMO to build their marketing automation platform from the ground up. Why would we do that to our CS leader? So I do think that is a consideration that will continue to trend away, but perhaps that's a little bit of what we're seeing here. But on the general indicators of health for our profession, they're all incredibly positive. So this feels a little bit like maybe just a little bit of noise to me.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And then, the data told us a little bit of a different story, kind of stuck with the overall trend of increased adoption of technology in general when we looked specifically at customer engagement or community platforms. So Jay, curious to hear your thoughts on that. We saw an increase from 25% of respondents who have that type of tool like a Higher Logic last year to now 28% this year. So curious what that says to you.
Yeah, so going back to what Abby said, I think it could even be in the margin of error of these surveys on both fronts. But what I think it is great news, if anybody's an investor on this call thinking about getting into a CS platform or a community platform company, look at all the headroom here, right? There's lots of room for us to grow. And the number one thing that I have heard from customer success leaders, chief customer officers, which I am part of a CCO group that meets every 6 weeks, compare notes on the market and what we're trying to accomplish. The biggest thing that everybody is working on is what we would maybe loosely call scaled customer success, which is how do you go engage more customers in sort of a customer marketing, high scalability, community style approach. I mean, you mentioned Gain, Grow, Retain earlier when you introduced me. Gain, Grow, Retain is a community for customer success professionals, and if folks want to join that, by the way, you can, gaingrowretain.com. But we engage with literally thousands of people every quarter through Gain, Grow, Retain, which is awesome. And every software company on the planet has the power to do that, to build an ecosystem of users that are engaged with your brand, that are getting help proactively, that are engaging with one another through an owned platform that you sort of set up and maintain and operate, and then get out of the way and let them sort of facilitate and let it flourish. So customer, I mean, obviously I'm a little biased on this front, Higher Logic being a community platform, but I just think there's a lot of exciting opportunities here for companies to scale the touch that they have with their customers. We have a program that we run through our own customer community where over the past 6 months, we've actually engaged with over 800 accounts in these sort of weekly calls that we have with them and the interactions that they have on our community platform in between. Think about the reach there. Like we're touching 800 customers, probably closer to 1,000 different individual people you know, and we're doing that with a handful of people, you know, a few hours a week, right? It's way more than you're going to get from a CSM. And that's up and down the segmentation, right? So we have our largest customers in these meetings, as well as many of our smaller customers. So we're able to provide that sort of broad touch, broad appeal, not just product stuff. It's sort of best practices and strategy level discussion as well. So customer engagement is huge. It's growing, and it's only going to get bigger from here.
So true. I mean, this is more of a comment than a question, but I thought it was interesting from the audience. So I want to read this to you guys and get your thoughts. So this says, when CS platforms, I assume this asker means in general, right? Any tool in a CS space. When they focus on helping CSMs manage portfolios to improve productivity rather than reporting on activity, that's when this attendee expects they would see an increased investment in those platforms. So that's just a really interesting comment. Any responses or thoughts on that?
I would wholeheartedly agree. You know, I think maybe what the CS space is looking at a little bit is that the people who often are the purchasers, they're the ones that really love those reports. So it's a necessary component of a full-fledged platform. But I think the hallmark of a platform that makes it at any organization is one that genuinely changes how people do their job every single day for the better. And so to this person's point around, you know, when it really helps the CSM work in a more efficient, effective way, that we'll continue to see adoption rise there. And I think when we talk about efficient and effective, I think a lot of that comes to how a CS platform integrates with all these other things that have important customer data. You know, so how do we understand customer engagement in other places like an LMS or like a community? How do we understand how they engage with support? And how does that all flow into your CS platform, which ideally serves that up to the CSM in a way that allows them to, you know, make the right choices with those insights. So I agree wholeheartedly.
Awesome. So I have two more kind of rapid fire questions for Abby and Jay. But before I ask them, I want to just remind everyone to go ahead and submit any other questions that you have for our experts via the question tab on your webinar console. Okay, are you guys ready for kind of rapid fire here?
Hit us.
Oh boy. Yep, let's do it.
Okay, so I want to hear from each of you. Maybe we'll go ladies first to Abby. What was the most surprising thing to you about the results of this year's CS leadership study?
Yeah, you know, I'm going to do a deep cut here, something that's not in our slides, but when you all can download the report, you can take a look at. I'm going to say this was surprising, but also I was very delighted to see this. So one of the first charts I always look at is, you know, last year and this year, we also asked, like, which of the following strategies have you implemented for CS? And we go through a bunch of different things around like standardized process, health scores, you know, consistent segmentation, things like this. And I always drop my eyes down and look to operations, customer success operations, and having a defined function for that. I am of the opinion that you know, in a high level way, of course, CS ops and the role it does or does not play at your org is a good indicator, a good barometer for where CS is at in its maturity scale at your organization. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the first things I checked out, and I was really excited to see that, you know, while it is still an area, when you look through all the other things that you could have implemented, it's still an area that on the bell-shaped curve is not as implemented as other strategies, which is something we need to change as a, you know, as a group of professionals. When we look at people who fully implemented, partially implemented, or planning to implement, we saw all of those take a step forward. And that's really exciting to me, particularly the fully implemented, just because I think, you know, we have these operations functions in all of our other counterpoints around the organization. When, you know, we started this conversation talking about what a good CCO looks like, and we called out operational excellence, and that means that having that be part of your organization, ideally early on, so it's part of how your organization grows and thrives and matures, is really exciting. So that was surprising but delightful to me.
Awesome. Jay, what surprised you the most?
All right, I like the term deep cut, so I'll go with another deep cut here. And and it really, and folks will see this in the report, but the question was, which departments do you work with on a regular basis to help you meet your objectives? I was surprised to see that only 48% of customer success teams are working with their finance orgs on a regular basis. I just think that's such an important touch point. And again, it speaks to a lot of what we've talked about here in terms of really understanding the business, connecting your work to the business in a tangible way that in some way, shape, or form maps up to revenue retention or expansion. So I would like to see, as we do this survey in future years, I'd like to see more teams working with their finance organizations, because it will signal a deeper business acumen on the part of CSM teams, and so on and so forth. So now the other thing I'll say here is that maybe the way this is filled out, I wouldn't expect the CSM level folks to have to work with finance all the time. So to the extent we did have some CSMs who fill this out, they may not know the extent to which their CSM leaders or their CS leaders work with finance orgs. But that's definitely an area of focus for us in our business, and I can see it being a benefit to others as well.
Yeah, great point. All right, we'll go in reverse order for my second rapid fire question, which, by the way, neither of you are answering that rapid fire, but
we didn't follow the prompt.
There's so much to say. It's okay. It's all so good. So Jay, I'll go to you first on this one and ask, what did the data in this year's study validate for you that you've observed, maybe anecdotally yourself?
Okay, I'm going to go more rapid fire on this one. More CCOs are popping up everywhere. 13% have CCOs, which is pretty cool.
Awesome. Abby?
I will also try to go more rapid fire. I'm going to go back to what Jay was talking about departments we work with, and product being at the top of that list, CS and product having a great relationship. I see that happening more and more. I see each of those orgs, parts of the org, understanding what the other can bring to the opposite and really starting to find moments to work together. And I think that's incredibly cool. And I hope that happens even more.
Yes, both great answers. Okay, now I want to get to some more audience questions. So this one reads, speaking to operational leadership, what are your top characteristics that would differentiate good versus great leadership in that area?
Was the question operational leadership?
Yep.
Well, I'll start, and Abby, you can jump in here too. I think having clarity on the metrics that you want to measure for the team that you manage is job number one. From an operational perspective, what is your tie to the business from a numerical perspective, and then what are your targets for those metrics, and how far away from the targets are you, and what are you doing to get to the targets if you're not on target? Every team that I oversee has a set of metrics that map to the customer experience and outcomes in some way, shape, or form. And we have some teams that we have all collectively set targets for those metrics. We track them on a monthly basis in our dashboards, and where we're not meeting those expectations because we know they have an impact on experience and outcomes, we have projects in place that are specifically designed to go what we call go to green on those metrics. Not only do we have projects, but we have owners for tasks. We have dates for delivery. This is blocking and tackling, y'all. And it really comes down to having accountability, making commitments, doing what you're saying you're going to do, doing what you say you're going to do, and having ways to track your progress. So high level stuff there, I realize, but those are just some of the things that come to mind with that question.
Yeah, I second you on a lot of those, Jay. And I was going to say the answer is popping to my mind is similar to yours, is that a great operational leader really understands the levers that they can pull. Like there's the classic levers that we all know we can influence, and someone who understands the broader scope of what you could pull, what the impact of pulling a certain lever is, both immediate and in the longer term, just having a creative open mind on that, and really understanding how every single metric that you may track in CS leads back to the business. Jay, you talked about presenting a good business use case. Never presenting your metrics in isolation, but always bringing it back to that broader story of what it means to the business.
Yeah. One other real just practical suggestion here is, as a leader, learn how to run a great meeting.
Yes.
There's a book by Patrick Lencioni called Death by Meeting. I think that's the title of it. Really, really good framework for how to do that. Also, The Advantage is very good. We subscribe to that wholesale across our organization and let that drive our operations. So I'd check those out.
So important. Okay, so next question from the audience. It says, our company just created a success department. What would you say is the most important thing or things to focus on to set a solid foundation?
It's a great question. I'll take a shot at this one, and then Jay, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. I think brand new customer success departments, one of the strongest things you can do out of the gate is define who you are. There's still a lot of misconceptions or lack of clarity around that. Like the number of CEOs I talk to who still think that success and support are the same thing makes my heart hurt a bit. So out of the gate, you need to know who you are, you need to understand what your objectives are, and then you need to socialize the heck out of them internally. You need to take on that education piece so that you are helping cultivate an entire organization that understands the purpose of this new department, and then will be hopefully less likely to try to push you into what would be useful for them for you to be. Like sales might want you to be something because it's going to help them in some way. But if you are rooted in what your purpose is, what your goals are, what your metrics are, and then you really socialize that around, that should be a really strong place to start from.
Totally agree. I was going to say the same thing as slightly differently, which is be clear about what it is you do for the customer and for the business. But everything else exactly the same as Abby said. Just get that foundation and know that you're going to have to iterate on it.
Absolutely.
Yes. We always call it, you got to go on a road show, right? You got to put together your Kickstarter and your presentation, and you've got to go on that road show internally and just evangelize customer success everywhere you possibly can.
Absolutely.
This is a really interesting question from the audience, so I want to get your guys' take on this. So it says, I'm curious how you think of the role of customer success differently when the customer is on a monthly subscription without an annual agreement.
Yeah, I tried to answer this one in the chat. I don't know if it came through or not, but when I hear that, I think of smaller customers with as in like smaller spend on a monthly basis that maybe are at a higher volume. So I think customer success is in that role more of a product-led thing. So is the product facilitating the right kind of interaction and engagement initially? And then beyond that, having a CSM to call customers and be there for customers it's a high cost way of doing business with a very small account like that. So your support team becomes really important. Again, that's different from customer success, but I think customer success is more of the scale model in that world where you're doing one-to-many outreaches, you're doing marketing type of interaction with big cohorts of customers all at once. I will say, if this person is saying, well, okay, that's true, but our contract values are also high, or our dollar values are also high, then I would say you need to look at using your CSM team or an account sales team to convert accounts from monthly to annual. That could be a big way to do evaluation of the business. We actually helped some customers do that back in the day. Consultants in this space.
I agree with all the points you made there, Jay, and I would add in just one other thought. I think sometimes when we think monthly versus annual, we think all of the rules and goals around like understand the customer journey, know what gets them to value, know what gets them to the renewal changes. It doesn't. You're just working on a shorter timeline. And while you're working on a shorter timeline, you're also working with a less intense commitment. So when someone comes up to that annual commitment, you best have done enough in the last year that they're ready to commit a whole other 12 months to you. That, you know, that hill is higher and the dollars associated are probably higher. Sure, you only have a month with a, you know, let's say a brand new, you know, monthly contract. You've only got a month. So your timeline is shorter, which means what you're trying to accomplish in that, you know, needs to be even more focused. You're not trying to do 6 things in that month. You should try trying to do 2 really important things in that month. But again, when you come up to the renewal or the continuation, it's not as steep of a hill. So those things are still in balance with one another, for lack of a better way to say it. So I think a lot of the same principles around, you know, understanding what needs to happen in what timeframes to get that next yes remains.
So true. Great point. Okay, last question for you both. This is a great one to end on. This reads, would you highlight the main goals that every CS team should shoot for with their clients?
Okay, I'll go real quickly. I got 3.
Good.
One is, do you have the right relationships with the right people in the organization? Executive sponsor, champion, users, key users. Number 2, and are you tracking that? Number 2 is, are you having the right interactions with those people? Whether that be, you know, engagement, EBRs, you know, understanding, having frequent calls, knowing, you know, having them respond to surveys, or having them do advocacy things as advocates for your brand on your behalf. Are you having the right interactions? And number 3 is product adoption and utilization. Are enough people doing the right things in the product, and you can drive that. So at a very quick high level, that's what I would say. Those 3 are key for me.
I was going to say number 3, Jay. You took the words right out of my mouth. I think, you know, relationships are incredibly important. Do not get me wrong, particularly for certain types of contracts of certain sizes and things like that. But the consistent thing, whether you have, you know, your high velocity or high touch CSM, is that if you have a product, use of that product and meaningful use of that product. So when I say that, like, you know, a login is great, but a login isn't great if that's all that's happening. What comes next? What can you see of value outside of the things that are, you know, that are actually occurring within your platform? That's the coal in the engine to me, you know. So you got to be really focused in around that. You got to be clear. You got to hope and work towards making sure that your customer understands how you are participatory in their success when it comes to their adoption of the platform.
Totally.
On that note, that concludes our Q&A session and today's webinar. I want to thank you all for joining us, and a special thank you to Abby and Jay for sharing all of their words of wisdom and expertise. A quick reminder for everyone that the recording of this webinar will be sent out within the next 24 hours. At the end of the webinar, you'll see a survey pop up. We would appreciate if you could take a moment before logging off to complete the survey and provide your feedback. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and happy reading of this year's CS Leadership Study.